I'm Nima Rajan. Ottawa is making it clear that its vaccination mandate for truckers will come into effect this weekend as planned. Under the new rules, all truckers arriving in Canada will need to be vaccinated against COVID-19 or face quarantine. 3 Trudeau cabinet ministers said an earlier statement from the border agency claiming that Canadian truckers would be exempt was provided in error. Starting tomorrow, any trucker crossing the border must be vaccinated. Trucking associations from both countries say 10 to 15% of the drivers who make regular cross-border trips will be sidelined as a result of the mandate, and that it will likely add further bottlenecks to the flow of goods. Meanwhile, Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam says the latest federal government modeling suggests COVID-19 hospitalizations will continue to surge. Dr. Tam says the Omicron variant is driving hospital admissions to where they will far exceed previous historical peaks. She indicated the Omicron variant will peak later this month with as many as 300,000 cases per day. But case counts are vastly underestimating the true numbers. Canada's chief medical advisor expects Health Canada to make its decision about Pfizer's Paxlovid antiviral treatment for COVID-19 in a week to 10 days. The American-made drug was approved for use in the U.S. 3 weeks ago and in the U.K. on December 31st. But Dr. Supriya Sharma tells the Canadian press that the Canadian submission was incomplete. The medication prevents the virus from reproducing within a patient's body. Pfizer's clinical trial showed that it prevented hospitalizations for high-risk patients by about 90%. The Vancouver Coastal Health Authority says someone is approaching vulnerable people on the downtown east side and offering them money to get vaccinated. This while falsely using the person's name and information. It says it has prevented several recent attempts to fraudulently obtain BC vaccine cards and revoked some that made it into the provincial immunization registry. Coastal Health says future instances of fraud will be brought to police. Alberta Health Services is laying off more employees. More than 200 part-time and casual food services workers will be losing their jobs as the province hires private contractors to do the work. The Alberta Union of Public Employees says the decision is heartbreaking and notes that this follows layoff notices being sent to laundry workers in the province. The Saskatchewan Health Authority has updated its COVID-19 plan to deal with the surge of Omicron variant cases. The authority says staff absences are up 140% compared to the previous wave of the pandemic. It says roughly 1,000 of its workers province-wide have taken time off work this week due to COVID-19. Tracy Zambori, the president of the Saskatchewan Union of Nurses, says in Saskatoon alone, there have been 200 vacant shifts in emergency rooms. The updated surge plan includes establishing teams of staff to quickly deploy to maintain key services. Manitoba physicians say they're in the dark about how the province will deal with the increasing patient loads. This comes as record-high COVID-19 hospitalizations continue to rise. Omicron variant infections haven't yet peaked in the province, and hospitals are already full. Doctors Manitoba President Dr. Christian Thompson says the situation is worse than it has ever been. He says doctors have been requesting the government's contingency plans for 2 years. The total backlog of surgeries and diagnostic tests in Manitoba now stands at more than 153,000. High-profile Ontario Cabinet Minister Rod Phillips is resigning at the end of next month, and he won't be seeking re-election. Mr. Phillips says it has been an honor to serve in Cabinet, but he's looking forward to returning to the private sector. He held 3 Cabinet portfolios. These included the positions of Environment Minister, Finance Minister, and Long-Term Care Minister. All right, well, meanwhile, Premier François Legault of Quebec says the number of daily COVID-19 cases in the province appears to have peaked. Health experts say virus-related hospitalizations should peak in the coming days. This comes after hitting an unprecedented 2,994 on Thursday. Premier Legault says this will allow him to lift the 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew, which was imposed on New Year's Eve. Quebec is the only province to prohibit people from leaving their homes at night as a way to control transmission. The Newfoundland and Labrador government says access to rapid COVID-19 tests is at the heart of its plan to get kids back in school. The government says it's aiming to resume in-school learning on January 24th. Students must take 2 rapid tests before they return. One test should be taken on January 21st and the other on the morning of January 24th. Education Minister Tom Osborne says students will receive 5 rapid COVID-19 tests, and the remaining 3 can be used if symptoms develop. Coming up next, we have our weekly energy update with Dan Mctigue. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Up next, we have our weekly energy update with Mr. Dan Mctigue. Dan Mctigue is the Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca. Take it away, Dan.
Well, thank you for this, Nima. Look, been a great week as far as energy prices are concerned, not because it's great for consumers, but because pretty much across the country, as we predicted right here last week, prices for fuel would go up, with the exception, of course, being Vancouver, which has seen prices dip from the $1.76.9 that we saw last Saturday, an all-time record for any city in Canada. In fact, I'd probably argue even North America. But they're now down into the $1.68, $1.67 range, mostly because refineries that were out due to colder weather have now come back online. In Alberta, we saw pretty much a firm stay on prices in the 137 to 139 range. Same for Saskatchewan and, of course, for Manitoba. Ontario, however, moved up about 5 cents a litre from the $1.41 range to the $1.45 range. Ditto for Quebec. Nima, we saw there, an increase of about 5.5 cents a litre, especially in Montreal. And of course, the Maritimes have now seen yet another increase, starting, of course, with Newfoundland up another penny and a half, and getting very close to the $1.60 range, while New Brunswick and Nova Scotia are now a little bit over $1.40. What this really says for us is that even though it's January, demand is down. And of course, diesel prices will continue to rise as they always do in colder weather, only because we use more heating oil at this time of year. What's really critical is where oil is going. No one expects, and it would be almost unprecedented, except for 2008, to see a circumstance where oil gained in value. This time last week, $75, $76 a barrel. Now we're looking at 81, 82, and pushing even today, $83 a barrel. And what that really means, it's a signal of the profound shortage of the product globally. And it's not just because of Omicron or because of COVID. It has a lot to do with actions, not just by the Canadian government, but also the Biden administration to do whatever it can to throttle off and to choke the oil and gas sector. The problem with that is that we're now seeing what that does in places like Europe, because the alternatives don't work. When the wind doesn't blow and it's cloudy outside, your renewables are absolutely useless. What's important is to know that in many parts of Europe, that is from Germany back over to Spain and over into Britain, they're actually firing up coal plants, dirty coal that the Greens have always said should never be revisited. In their desire to kill off oil and gas, we've now seen a circumstance where, unless people want to freeze to death or pay for products and heating products that would be far too expensive for most to pay, you really have only one alternative, and that's coal. Here in Canada, we are looking at moves by government, not just by Mr. Stéphane Guilbeault, who's now your environment minister, to choke off and to kill off the oil and gas sector in the next 18 months. You're also seeing the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions saying we want climate risk now to be part of the residual amounts that banks have to keep in reserve, just in case there's exposure to that. What that really means is an attempt to make sure that banks and lending institutions provide no money to the oil and gas sector. The problem with that is really truly the golden goose of this country. You kill the oil and gas sector and its derivative markets, and we're seeing a decline, of course, in manufacturing across Canada. You're seeing an exit of capital into non-residential areas. The National Bank talked about this earlier this week. Kill the oil and gas sector, you might as well kill the revenues that keep this country together. We have some excellent rapport with achieving environmental outcomes in the oil and gas sector and in the mining sector. But if we're looking for that great transition to the brave new world of electric vehicles and renewables, you only have to ask the question: why did the Trudeau government refused to use national security overview on the Investment Canada Act in order to prevent Zijin Minerals from taking over one of our largest lithium players, Neolithium Canada. These are all questions that have to be asked because the next generation, the next market, the future that these Greens keep talking about in the Liberal Party is in fact going to be using a lot more lithium. And now we're simply bequeathing it to China to have greater control, not just of its own lithium and its own battery production and rare minerals, but more importantly, much control of the price of all those future minerals to make those EVs run. Anyways, it's going to be a very expensive week. Look for about a 2-cent increase on average between now and next week. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for having me again, Nima.
Lots to keep our eyes out for, Dan. Thanks for that. For more details on fuel prices at the pump, visit gaswizard.ca. All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break with a look at the exciting world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets with Catherine Murray. Stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break on Forum Daily. Welcome back. Up next, we take a look at the ever-evolving world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets with Catherine Murray, the host of The Buck Stops Here. All yours, Catherine.
Thank you, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly crypto and digital asset update. I am Catherine Murray. Well, when we take a look at cryptocurrencies, the December declines have in fact continued into December. We are seeing Bitcoin as well as Ethereum down by about 12.5 and 15% respectively. We did have some stability Tuesday, Wednesday of this week when the equity markets were also moving higher. Again, it seems as though when we've got a bit of a risk-off mode and mood, you are seeing cryptocurrencies pull back. Bitcoin is now actually down by 40% from its $69,000 high. The overall market cap is $2 trillion for cryptocurrencies. Now, despite the declines and the volatility that we've been seeing, interest in it has not waned. So a couple of really interesting headlines that we note this week. India's central bank is creating a fintech department to address central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. And in fact, Fed Chair Jerome Powell revealed in his testimony before the U.S. Senate Banking Committee that they will be releasing, the U.S. Federal Reserve, that is, releasing their report on cryptocurrencies shortly. And there are expectations that it will focus on CBDCs, so get used to hearing that, and the potential for them to coexist with privately issued stablecoins. And the reason why that's so important is because of the regulatory overhang that we often hear about, and that does have some investors concerned, but basically it's really important to hear, we do hear it, that the central bank digital currency as well as privately issued stablecoins can coexist, because that would allow the industry to continue to grow and evolve. We've also heard that PayPal is exploring the launch of its own stablecoin, and Visa surveyed small businesses across 9 countries and found that 25% of the small businesses do plan to accept crypto as payment. So again, continued buy-in. Iran, their central bank is planning to allow international, this is what we're hearing, allow international trade settlements in crypto. And interestingly as well, when we think about inflation and the central banks raising interest rates, so many countries have actually done that to the point where their currencies are being devalued because they've got runaway inflation. People in Turkey are actually apparently buying crypto because their currency is plummeting. Interestingly as well, we've heard that billionaire investor Bill Miller, he was quite a famous money manager back in the 90s for outperforming the S&P 500 for 15 years in a row. He was a big PM over at Legg Mason. He was interviewed and revealed that 50% of his personal wealth is in Bitcoin. So again, some continued buy-in. Now, having said that, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, believes that the increased correlation that we're seeing between the performance of cryptocurrencies and the equity markets, when the equity markets were down this week, crypto was down and vice versa, that limits the perceived risk diversification. Remember, a lot of people have been buying crypto when they are concerned about fiat currencies, your dollar, the impact that federal governments are having on your currency. So people are kind of buying crypto as a bit of a hedge against that, just like they used to buy gold. and maybe still do. But the IMF is pointing out that that might not be a great diversification tactic because they seem to be correlated. Now, having said that, and there's still, of course, a question mark by some in terms of whether or not it is an asset and what kind of asset it is. So I'll leave you with this. Binance's CEO, his net worth is $96 billion. He's the 11th wealthiest person in the world. So seems like for him, anyway, it was an asset. Nima, I'll send it back to you.
Quite an asset indeed. Thanks for that, Catherine. For more analysis and news on the markets, be sure to tune in to Catherine Murray on The Buck Stops Here. All right, well, meanwhile, President Joe Biden nominated 3 people to the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors. These include Sarah Bloom Raskin, a former Fed and Treasury official for the top regulatory slot, and Lisa Cook, who would be the first Black woman to serve on the board. Mr. Biden also nominated Philip Jefferson, an economist and a former Fed researcher. The 3 nominees, who will have to be confirmed by the Senate, would fill out the 7-member board. They would join the Fed at a particularly challenging time in which it will undertake the delicate task of raising its benchmark interest rate. This in efforts to try to curb inflation without undercutting the economic recovery. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break with a look at news happening around the world. The British Prime Minister apologizes to the Queen. Russia gives NATO a deadline, and a far-right U.S. militia leader is charged with sedition. We'll have these stories and more news from around the world after a short break, so stay with us. We'll be right back on Forum Daily News. Boris Johnson's office has apologized this morning to the royal family for another lockdown-breaching staff party inside 10 Downing Street. This one took place on April 16th last year, on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral. It is the latest in a string of rule-breaking social events that are threatening to topple the British Prime Minister. A Johnson spokesman said it is deeply regrettable that this took place at a time of national mourning, and Number 10 has apologized to the palace. The day after the party, Queen Elizabeth adhered to social distancing rules and sat alone in the church during her husband's funeral service. Russia has strongly repeated its demand that NATO doesn't expand eastward to Ukraine and other ex-Soviet nations. This is despite the rejection of that demand by the military alliance amid a Russian troop buildup near Ukraine. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Friday described Moscow's demands as essential for the progress of diplomatic efforts to defuse soaring tensions over Ukraine. He argued that the deployment of NATO forces and weapons near Russia's borders poses a security challenge that must be addressed immediately. Amid the tensions, Ukraine sustained a massive cyber attack on Friday, which hit websites of multiple government agencies. The founder and leader of the far-right Oath Keepers militia group, Stuart Rhodes, has been arrested and charged with seditious conspiracy in the violent January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. 10 other people were also charged with seditious conspiracy in connection with the assault. It is the first time in over a decade that the U.S. Justice Department has laid such a charge. A legal official says Myanmar's military-installed government has filed 5 new corruption charges against ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. They are in connection with granting permits to rent and buy a helicopter. Ms. Suu Kyi, who has been detained since last February's military takeover, is already being tried on 5 other corruption charges. Her supporters and rights groups say the cases against her were artificially planned by the military to justify its takeover and prevent her from returning to politics. The United Nations is forecasting lower global economic growth for 2022 and 2023. It blames new waves of coronavirus infections, persistent labor market challenges, lingering supply chain issues, and rising inflationary pressures. The UN's global economic forecast, released yesterday, says the world economy grew 5.5% in 2021, which is the highest rate of growth in more than 4 decades. But it's projected to grow only 4% in 2022 and 3.5% in 2023. China's global trade surplus surged to $676 billion in 2021, which is likely the highest ever for any country. Exports jumped 30% over a year earlier to $3.3 trillion. This is despite shortages of semiconductors and processor chips for smartphones and other products that disrupted manufacturing. Customs data showed the country's trade surplus in December swelled nearly 21% over a year earlier to a monthly record of $94 billion. A Harvard University study has produced more evidence that the Epstein-Barr virus may set some people on the path to developing multiple sclerosis. The Epstein-Barr virus, which is best known for causing mono in teens and young adults, has long been suspected of playing a role in the development of MS. Researchers tracked blood samples of 10 million Americans, and they found the risk of MS increased 32-fold following Epstein-Barr infection. They say the findings strongly suggest that Epstein-Barr infection is a cause and not a consequence of MS. Queen Margrethe of Denmark marked her 50 years on the throne today by laying a wreath on the grave of her parents. She also met with the government and attended a reception at Parliament. Many Jubilee events have been postponed due to the pandemic. This is including a ride through the capital in a horse-drawn carriage, a gala performance at the Royal Theatre, and a festive banquet. People living in Manitoba's capital are enjoying a new winter activity. Winnipeg residents can now cruise the frozen Assiniboine and Red Rivers on special bikes designed to be used on ice. Spark Rentals, a city-based rental equipment company, launched ice cycles last week. A Spark co-founder says he's been working on bringing the bikes to Winnipeg since he first used one in China 6 years ago. Sanan Lilac says the pandemic forced him to speed up the offering after his rental business took a hit when large-scale events were canceled. He hopes to expand the business to other cities in Canada. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, or follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.